My sister-in-law convinced my family I should give her my $200K inheritance. But when my cousin exposed her private messages, the wedding was canceled and they all broke down. I'm 27 years old. I work in digital marketing, and until about a year ago, I thought I had a pretty normal family. You know, the typical dramas, but nothing too crazy. My family has a bakery in a small town that my parents, Susan and Christopher, have run for decades, and I always thought we were close, that we supported each other. But it turns out that when there's money involved, when there's the possibility of money, people you thought you knew can turn into someone completely different. And I'm not exaggerating. Literally, my family almost destroyed itself over a trust fund that I couldn't even touch yet. I should start at the beginning, I guess. My grandfather died like 5 years ago, and it was horrible because we were really close. He was that type of grandfather who always had time for you, who really listened when you told him things, not like those people who just wait for their turn to talk. He worked his whole life, saved every penny he could, and when he died, he left us all some things. He left my parents some money to improve the bakery. He left my brother Daniel his watch and some tools he had. Things with sentimental value more than anything else. And to me? Well, he left me a trust fund that I could access when I turned 30, meaning in 3 more years from now. The fund was specifically for buying a house, starting a business, or paying for additional education, those things. My grandfather was very clear about the terms. He even left everything in writing with his lawyer, because he knew what it was like to work hard for your money, and he wanted to make sure I used it for something that really mattered. When he died, I was 22, and honestly, I didn't even think much about the fund for years. I was focused on finishing my degree, getting a job, learning to be an adult, and all that stuff. The money was there, growing with interest or whatever trust funds do, and I just went on with my life. My family knew about it, obviously, but it was never a topic of conversation. Daniel and I were always close, despite the age difference. He's 25 now, and there was never any competition between us over who received what from Grandpa. He understood that Grandpa had been fair in his own way, distributing things according to what each of us would need or appreciate most. Daniel was always like the golden boy of the family, and I don't say that with resentment or anything. It was just the reality. He was charismatic, everyone loved him, he got good grades without trying too hard. That type of person who just does well in life without putting in too much effort. He worked at the bakery with my parents, and he loved it. He talked about expanding the business someday, opening more locations. He had all these big plans. I always supported him. I thought it was great that he had that passion for the family business. For my part, I decided to do my own thing with digital marketing. And although my parents at first wanted me to work with them too, they eventually accepted that I had my own interests. About 2 years ago, Daniel met Natalie at some networking event or something like that. She came from a family with money, like her parents had properties and businesses and all that stuff. From the beginning, I noticed something weird about her, but I thought I was just being the protective older sister. You know? Nobody is good enough for your little brother. Natalie was one of those people who always casually mentioned expensive things they had or fancy places they'd been, but they did it in a way that sounded like they weren't showing off, even though they totally were. Daniel was completely in love, and when they got engaged like a year and a half ago, the whole family was excited. My parents adored Natalie. They thought she was perfect for Daniel, that she came from a good family, that she was ambitious, all those things that parents value. The first time Natalie mentioned my trust fund was at a family dinner like 6 months after the engagement. We were all at my parents' house, eating lasagna that my mom had made, talking about wedding plans and all that. Natalie was showing my mom pictures of dresses on her phone when suddenly she looks at me and says, "Hey, Lily, what are you going to do with that fund your grandfather left you when you can access it?" The question took me by surprise because literally nobody had talked about that in years, and I said something like, "Well, I don't know. Probably buy a house or maybe invest in my own business eventually." "Why?" And she just smiled and said, "Oh no, just curious. It's just that it's a lot of money, right? It must be exciting to know you have it waiting for you." Looking back, I should have seen it coming at that moment. I should have noticed the way her eyes lit up when I talked about the money, or how Daniel glanced at her quickly when she asked the question. But I didn't. I thought she was just making conversation. The following weeks, everything continued. Normally. Or at least that's what I thought. Daniel and Natalie kept planning their wedding, which was going to be in like a year, and I continued with my work and my life. My cousin Danielle, who has always been like my best friend besides being my cousin, mentioned to me a couple of times that Natalie had asked her about the fund too, like how much it was exactly, if I could access it before 30, things like that. Danielle told me she thought it was weird, but I didn't give it much importance. Then Natalie started being more direct. It was like 2 months after that first dinner. She invited me to lunch, just the two of us. She said she wanted to get to know me better since we were going to be family and all that. We went to a nice restaurant. She insisted on paying, and during the meal she was super nice, asking me about my work, my future plans, that kind of thing. But just when I thought the meal was going to end without problems, she got serious and said, "Look, Lily, I want to talk to you about something important. Daniel and I have been thinking a lot about our future, and well, we want to buy a house after we get married, something where we can really start our life together. The problem is that house prices are impossible right now, and although my family is going to help us with the wedding, we can't ask them to also help us with the house. It would be too much." At that moment, I still didn't understand where the conversation was going. So I just nodded and said something like, "Yeah, I understand. Real estate is expensive everywhere." And then she dropped the bomb. She said, "Well, we were thinking that maybe you could help us. You have that fund from your grandfather that you won't even be able to use for 3 more years, and Daniel is your brother, your only direct family of your generation. It would be an amazing wedding gift if you could give us a portion of the fund, or maybe even use it as a down payment for a house that would technically be for your brother. We'd pay you back eventually, obviously, but it would help us so much now that we really need it." I was literally left with my mouth open. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told her, "Natalie, I can't do that. First, because I can't even access the money yet, and second, because my grandfather left specific conditions for what it can be used for, and it doesn't include giving it away or lending it. Plus, it's my future. It's the money I'm going to use for my own house or business." She made this disappointed face, like I had just kicked a puppy, and said, "Oh, Lily, I thought you valued your family more than that. Daniel is your brother. I thought you'd want to help him start his life. But well, I guess money is more important to you than your own family." That made me really angry, but I tried to stay calm and explain to her again that it wasn't about valuing money more than family. It was about respecting my grandfather's last wishes and protecting my own future. She just nodded with this fake smile and said, "It's okay, I understand. Don't worry." But I knew she didn't understand, and I knew this wasn't going to end there. And I was right, because things only got worse after that lunch. Daniel started calling me like a week later. At first it was casual, like, "Hey sis, how are you? We haven't talked in a while. Come have dinner with us." But eventually he'd get to the real point of the call, which was the fund. He'd tell me things like, "Lily, understand our position. We want to start our life together, right? And you literally have the money sitting there doing nothing with it. We're not asking for everything, just a portion, enough for a down payment on a house." And I'd tell him the same thing I'd told Natalie, that I couldn't, that there were legal conditions, that it was my future. But he kept insisting, saying that family helps each other, that when I needed something, he'd be there for me. All those things that sound good in theory, but don't really apply when you're being pressured to give away your inheritance. The worst part was when my parents got involved. Like a month into this whole situation, they called me and told me we needed to have a family meeting, that there was something important to discuss. I went to their house thinking it might be about the bakery or something, but when I arrived, Daniel and Natalie were already there, sitting in the living room with my parents. My mom made me sit down and my dad started with this speech about the importance of family, about how they had always taught Daniel and me to support each other, about how Grandpa would have wanted us to use the resources he left us to help each other. It was basically an intervention, but instead of being about drugs or something, it was about my supposed obligation to share my inheritance with my brother. My mom said she understood the fund was mine, but that I should also consider that Daniel had always supported me, that he was my brother and he needed help now. My dad added that they weren't asking me to give all the money, just to contribute a portion to help Daniel and Natalie buy their first house. They said we could make a legal agreement where they'd pay me back eventually, that it would be like a family loan. I explained to them for the 10th time that I couldn't legally access the fund for that my grandfather had been specific in his instructions, and that besides I didn't feel comfortable basically mortgaging my own future for my brother's house. Natalie started crying, saying she felt rejected by the family, that she never thought it would be so hard to be accepted. Daniel consoled her while looking at me with this expression of disappointment that made me feel like the worst person in the world. My parents said I should think about it more, that I was being selfish, and that my grandfather would have been disappointed to see me acting this way. That last part hurt more than I want to admit. My grandfather and I were very close, and the idea that he would have been disappointed in me was like a dagger to the heart. But I also knew, deep down, that my grandfather had left that fund specifically for me, with specific conditions, because he wanted me to have something secure for my future. If he had wanted me to share it with Daniel, he would have structured it differently. I stood up and told them I was sorry, but my answer was no, and I left the house with everyone looking at me like I was the devil. The following weeks were an absolute nightmare. Natalie started talking to other relatives, telling them her version of the story where I was the cruel sister who refused to help my poor brother buy his first house. Cousins, uncles, even family friends started sending me messages telling me I should reconsider, that family was more important than money, that I was being immature. The only person who supported me from the beginning was Danielle, who told me I was doing the right thing and not to let them manipulate me. Natalie went even further. She started investigating my finances, like literally got information about my job and how much I earned. I don't know how, but she did. One day, I got a call from Human Resources at my work asking me about a trust fund that someone had mentioned, saying that maybe I hadn't declared all my assets or something like that. It was super awkward having to explain to them that the fund was inaccessible until I turned 30, and that someone was trying to get me in trouble for personal reasons. HR was understanding but made it clear they didn't want personal drama affecting work. By that point, I was exhausted, angry, and basically feeling like I had lost my entire family for refusing to give away my inheritance. Daniel stopped talking to me, unless it was to ask me to reconsider. My parents called me to give me more lectures about family responsibility. Natalie posted passive-aggressive things on social media about selfish people and broken families. I was sleeping badly, crying at night, wondering if I really was the bad guy in this story. That's when I decided I needed legal protection. I went to a lawyer who reviewed the terms of the trust fund and confirmed that not only could I not legally use the money the way Daniel and Natalie wanted, but trying to do so could result in complete loss of the fund. The lawyer also helped me document all the harassment I'd been suffering, all the calls, messages, the situation with my work, everything. He recommended sending a cease and desist letter to Natalie and Daniel, basically legally telling them to stop harassing me about the fund or there would be consequences. When that letter arrived, things exploded. Daniel called me screaming, saying he couldn't believe I'd involved lawyers, that I was destroying the family over money. Natalie posted something on social media about being legally attacked for wanting family help. My parents told me I'd gone too far, that lawyers had no place in family matters. I simply told them I wasn't going to discuss this anymore, that my decision was final, and that if they couldn't respect it, then we needed distance. Like 2 months went by where I basically didn't talk to anyone in my family except Danielle. They were the 2 loneliest months of my life, honestly. I missed birthdays, family dinners, events at the bakery. Danielle kept me informed of the basics, but I had decided that my mental health was more important than forcing relationships with people who only saw me as a bank. And then what changed? Everything happened. Daniel sent a message to the family chat by accident. It was a message that obviously was meant for Natalie, but he sent it to the group where we all were. My parents, me, some uncles, Danielle, everyone. The message said something like, "Babe, we almost have it. Just a little more pressure and she's going to give in. My mom says she's going to talk to her again this week. And when we get the money, we can start looking at houses in those expensive areas you like. It's going to be worth all of this." The chat went absolutely silent for several minutes. Then Daniel sent like 20 messages in a row trying to explain, saying it wasn't what it seemed, that they'd misinterpreted it. But the damage was done. And what came after was even worse for them. Because Danielle, who apparently had been suspecting Natalie for weeks, sent screenshots she'd gotten of Natalie's posts in a private Facebook group with her friends. The screenshots showed Natalie literally bragging about how she'd manipulated my entire family to pressure me, how she'd contacted my work hoping to get me in trouble, how she planned to use the money not just for the house but for trips and luxuries she wanted. There was one message where she said, like verbatim, "The idiot sister is going to end up giving us the money because she can't stand being away from her family. I have them all on my side. It's just a matter of time. Another message said, the best part is, Daniel doesn't even know half of what I've done. He thinks we're just asking for family help. He doesn't know I already investigated her finances and contacted her work. He's so naive. When those screenshots circulated in the family chat, it was like a bomb exploded. My parents immediately called Daniel, demanding explanations. Daniel at first tried to defend Natalie, but when he saw the screenshots where she basically called him naive and talked about manipulating him too, something broke. My mom was crying, saying she couldn't believe she had pressured her own daughter for someone who just wanted money. My dad was furious, saying Natalie had destroyed our family with her lies. The uncles and cousins who had been pressuring me started sending apology messages. One of my uncles wrote, "Lily, forgive me. I didn't know Natalie was manipulating the situation like that. I genuinely thought they just wanted family help." Danielle sent a message saying, "I told you something was off about that woman, but nobody listened to me." The only person who didn't say anything was Natalie, who I guess realized her entire plan had collapsed. Daniel called me like 2 days later, and he was a complete mess. He was crying, saying he was so sorry, that he had no idea how far Natalie had gone, that he genuinely thought they were just asking for help as family, and that I was being difficult. He told me he'd broken up with Natalie as soon as he saw the screenshots, that he couldn't believe the woman he was going to marry had been capable of doing all that. He told me he'd understand if I never forgave him, that he'd been an idiot for not listening to me, for pressuring me, for letting his desire to have the perfect life cloud his judgment. I told him I needed time, that I couldn't just forgive everything and act like nothing had happened. I told him he'd hurt me deeply, that he'd made me feel alone and attacked when he should have been on my side. T accepted everything, said he understood, that he was going to give me whatever space I needed. My parents came to my apartment like a week later, with flowers and apologies. My mom couldn't stop crying, saying she was the worst mother in the world for having pressured her own daughter to give away her inheritance. My dad was quieter, but I saw in his eyes that he was genuinely sorry. I told them the same thing. I told Daniel that I needed time, that I couldn't just forget months of harassment and pressure, because now they realized Natalie was manipulative. I told them they'd lost my trust, that they'd chosen money over me, and that wasn't fixed with flowers and apologies. Natalie basically disappeared. She canceled all her social media, stopped going to events where she might run into anyone from my family, and according to what I heard from Danielle, her own parents were furious with her about how she'd handled everything. The wedding was obviously canceled. Daniel had to call all the guests and explain there wasn't going to be a wedding, which was probably humiliating, but honestly, I felt he deserved it a little. It's been like 6 months since all that. Things with my family are slowly improving, but they're not like they were before, and probably never will be. Daniel is going to therapy, trying to understand how he let someone manipulate him like that and how he hurt his sister so deeply in the process. We've had some meals together, awkward but honest, where he's told me repeatedly how sorry he is. I think he's genuinely remorseful. But I also think it's going to take a long time before our relationship is back to what it was. My parents are trying. Honestly. They call me regularly, but not about anything heavy. Just to see how I am, to invite me to dinner without pressure that I have to go. I've been to the bakery a couple of times and things are cordial, but there's this weird tension that I don't know if it'll ever completely disappear. My mom told me recently that she's embarrassed to remember how she acted, how she let someone convince her to pressure her own daughter. I told her I forgave her, but that I also needed her to understand that things had changed between us. What affects me most, I guess, is the loss of that feeling of family security. Before all this, I would have sworn my family would always be on my side, that no matter what happened, they'd support me. Now, I know that's not completely true, that money can turn the people closest to you into strangers, that even people who love you can hurt you deeply if they think they have a good reason to do it. I turned 30 inches 2.5 years. I'm going to access that trust fund that almost destroyed my family. I still don't know exactly what I'm going to do with it. Probably buy a house like I always planned. Maybe invest in a small business eventually. What I do know is I'm going to use that money exactly the way my grandfather wanted, to build my own secure and independent future. And I'm going to be grateful for the rest of my life that my grandfather was wise enough to put those conditions on the fund, because without them, I probably would have given in to the pressure and would have given away my future to keep family peace. Last week, Daniel asked me if we could have lunch, just the two of us. We went to a cafe near my work, and for the first time in months, the conversation flowed somewhat naturally. We talked about his work at the bakery, my marketing projects, normal sibling stuff. At the end of lunch, he told me, "You know what, sis? I'm proud of you for standing firm. Even though at the time I was on the other side pressuring you, now I understand you did the right thing. You deserve that fund, and all the good things that come with it." Those words meant more to me than he probably knows, because I finally felt like my brother was back, the one who supported me and wanted the best for me. I don't know if my family is going to be completely what it was before. Probably not. But we're trying. Taking small steps. Rebuilding something new on the rubble of what we had. And maybe that's enough. Maybe families don't always stay intact, but the ones worth it find ways to adapt and grow, even after almost completely destroying themselves.